I miss her. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that stops me from functioning, but in that quiet, steady way that just sits there in the background of everything I do. It's not something I talk about much because, honestly, how do you even bring that up without it sounding like you're still stuck? But the truth is, missing someone doesn't really care about how much time has passed or how many times you've told yourself you're over it. It just shows up when it wants to, in the middle of a random Tuesday when you're doing something completely unrelated, and suddenly there it is again. That feeling, that specific kind of absence that you can't really describe to someone who hasn't felt it. And the worst part isn't even the big moments. It's the small ones that catch you completely off guard when you least expect it. You ever see something and your first instinct is to share it with someone who's no longer in your life? Like your brain didn't get the memo that things changed. You see a meme, a place, hear a song, and for literally half a second your mind goes, I need to send her this. And then it stops, just like that. And you're back to reality. That half second is brutal because it's not dramatic, it's not a breakdown. It's just this tiny moment where everything feels slightly wrong and then you keep moving. But those moments add up, and they happen more than people realize, more than you'd expect even months after things ended. Does that ever happen to you, or is it just something you carry alone without saying anything? The thing about missing someone that nobody really explains is that it's not just about the person. It's about the version of yourself that existed when they were around. The way you felt, the way things made sense, the way certain moments had a specific kind of comfort that you didn't even notice at the time because you thought it would just always be there. And then it's not. And now you're not just missing her, you're missing that whole version of your life that came with her. The routines, the conversations, the way things felt normal without you even having to try. Losing that is a completely different kind of loss that takes way longer to process than people give it credit for. Here's something that took me a long time to actually sit with. Missing someone and knowing things are better this way can exist at the same time. People act like those two things cancel each other out, but they don't. You can fully understand why something ended, you can accept it, you can even be in a better place because of it, and still feel the weight of what's gone. That's not weakness, that's not being stuck, that's just being honest. And I think a lot of people pretend they don't feel that because admitting it sounds like you want things to go back to how they were. But missing something and wanting it back are not the same thing. That distinction matters more than most people realize. What makes it worse is the unfinished business. Not necessarily in a dramatic sense, but in a practical, everyday sense. The conversations that never happened, the things you assumed you'd eventually say but never did because you thought there was more time. You don't realize how much you rely on the idea of later until later stops being an option. And then all those things just sit in your head with nowhere to go. You replay conversations. You think about what you could have said differently, what you should have done differently. And even when you know it changes nothing at this point, your brain still goes there, still tries to find the version of the story where things turned out differently. Have you ever been stuck in that loop at 2 a.m. when everything is quiet and there's nothing to distract you from your own thoughts?
The waves thing is real. People talk about grief in stages like it's something you move through in order, but missing someone doesn't work like that. Some days you're completely fine, you're busy, you're distracted, you feel like yourself, and the absence barely registers. And then out of nowhere, for no real reason, it hits hard. Not because something dramatic happened, not because of a big reminder, just because. And when it hits like that, out of nowhere, it almost feels more disorienting than the early days. Because at least in the beginning you expected it. Now it just shows up unannounced and you have to deal with it in the middle of whatever you were doing. There's also the part where you start noticing your own mistakes with more clarity the further you get from it. When you're in something, you can only see so much, but when you have distance, you start seeing things you couldn't see before. You notice the times you didn't show up the way you should have, the things you said without really thinking about how they landed, the moments where you were present physically but completely somewhere else mentally. And that clarity doesn't feel good. It doesn't come with relief. It comes with this low-level frustration directed mostly at yourself because you can see it now, but you can't do anything with it. You can't go back and fix those moments. You just have to take that awareness and actually do something different going forward, which sounds simple but is actually one of the harder things to consistently follow through on when you're still in the middle of processing everything else. Something people don't really talk about is how missing someone changes the way you connect with other people afterward. Not in an obvious, dramatic way, but in small ways. The way you hold back a little more than you used to. The way certain things don't feel as easy or as natural as they once did. The way you compare, even when you're actively trying not to. And it's not fair to the new people in your life, but it happens anyway because you're not the same person you were before. She changed something in how you move through the world, in how you relate to people, in what you notice and what you look for. And that doesn't just reset when things end. There's this dangerous thing that happens with memory too. The further you get from something, the more the rough edges soften. The hard moments fade a little, the good ones get sharper, and suddenly what you're missing starts to feel almost perfect in your head, even if it genuinely wasn't. And then you're not even missing the real thing anymore. You're missing a version of it that only exists in your head, cleaned up and edited by time. And that version is impossible to compete with. Nothing in real life can match something that only exists as a highlight reel in your memory. Have you ever caught yourself doing this and then had to actively remind yourself that what you're romanticizing wasn't actually what it was?
The silence is loud in specific ways, not all the time, not constantly, but in certain moments it just is. When something good happens and she's not the person you call anymore. When something goes wrong and you reach for your phone out of habit and then remember. When you're somewhere you both used to go and the familiarity of it sits weird now. It's not devastating every time. Sometimes it's just a quiet recognition that something is different, but those moments stack. And even when you don't say anything about it to anyone, you feel it. And pretending you don't doesn't actually make it go away. It just means you're carrying it quietly instead of carrying it out loud. Moving on is one of those things that sounds straightforward until you're actually trying to do it. Because moving forward doesn't automatically mean you've made peace with what happened. Sometimes it just means you've gotten better at not letting it show. You go about your day, you talk to people, you function, and from the outside it looks like you're fine. And maybe you are mostly fine, but fine and fully resolved are not the same thing. And I think a lot of people in their 20s especially are walking around mostly fine, but still carrying things they haven't fully dealt with because life doesn't pause long enough to actually process everything at the pace it actually needs. The timing thing is also something that sits with you, not in a regret way necessarily, just in a how did things end up here kind of way. Like you think about the sequence of events that led to where things are now, and there's always this moment where you can see the fork in the road, where one choice led to a different outcome. And you don't obsess over it, but you notice it, and noticing it is its own kind of thing to sit with. Because you're not trying to undo anything, you're just processing the reality of how choices compound and lead to specific places, and sometimes those places weren't what you expected or wanted at the time. One of the more underrated parts of missing someone is missing being known by them, not in a deep philosophical way, just in a practical, day-to-day way, the way they knew your specific humor, the way you didn't have to explain context for things, the way certain things were just understood without you having to lay it all out. That kind of familiarity takes time to build with anyone, and when it's gone, you feel the absence of it in conversations with other people, where you have to start from scratch, where jokes don't land the same way yet, where you have to give background before you can even get to the actual point. It's exhausting in a way that's hard to articulate until you feel it. And you do eventually get to a place where it's quieter, not gone, not completely resolved, but quieter. The waves come less frequently, the random moments of absence hit less hard. You go longer stretches without it crossing your mind. And that's not forgetting, that's not replacing, that's just time doing what it does. But even in that quieter place, something still shows up every now and then. A song, a place, a random thought, and for a second it's all right there again, fully present, fully felt. And then it passes and you keep moving, because that's really all you can do at a certain point. Just keep moving and let it be what it is. There's also something worth saying about the people who never fully let themselves feel it in the first place, who jump straight into distraction, into new situations, into staying busy enough that there's no room for it to actually land. And that works for a while, but it doesn't disappear just because you didn't look at it. It just waits, and it tends to show up later in ways you don't immediately recognize as being connected to what you didn't process. In the way you react to things, in the patterns you repeat, in the walls you put up that you don't even realize are there. Processing something uncomfortable is not weakness. Avoiding it because it's uncomfortable is actually the thing that keeps you stuck longer. What I think people in their 20s don't hear enough is that feeling this doesn't mean you're behind or broken or haven't moved on correctly. There's no correct timeline for this. There's no point where you're supposed to have fully wrapped it up and filed it away. Some things stay with you in smaller ways for a long time, and that's not a problem to fix, it's just the reality of having actually cared about something. The depth of the missing is directly connected to the depth of what it was. And if it was real, if it actually mattered, then of course some version of it is still there. That's not a flaw in how you're handling it. That's just what it means to have been present for something that actually meant something to you. So if you're in the middle of this right now, if any of this sounds familiar, if you've been carrying something quietly and telling yourself you should be over it by now, just know that the timeline you have in your head for when you're supposed to feel fine is probably not accurate. You don't get over things on a schedule, you just keep going, keep living, keep building your life, and eventually the weight of it shifts. It doesn't disappear, it just becomes something you carry differently, something that takes up less space, something that stopped running the background of your daily life and turned into something quieter, more occasional, more manageable. And that's probably the most honest version of moving on that actually exists.